Howdy, folks. I'm Jeff Gonzalez, former Navy SEAL and founder of Trident Concepts, host of the Bulletproof Workshop powered by AR15.com, where we discuss knowledge, skills, and ability to help bulletproof your everyday performance in whatever your field or passion. Welcome to Podcast 021. My next guest started riding motorcycles at a really early age, like 3 years old, but gave it up after a hard crash. Came back to motocross at age 5 and started racing and winning. Pursuing his passion, he became a professional rider still in his teens, which is I'm impressed by that. He started the MX Factory in Austin, Texas to teach kids not only to be good kids, but good riders. Having invested much of his life in motocross and pioneering a program called Learn to Ride to help get kids interested in the sport and lifestyle, giving them a place to explore their own passion. He's a professional motocross racer, supercross racer, business owner, father, and now motocross coach. Please welcome to the show, Tyler Livesay.
Perfect, man. That was good. That was one of the better ones. Yeah, like kudos, you know?
Thank you.
You did some research there.
Well, that's kind of like, that's my job. I'm supposed to do that. But it was also fun learning more about you.
Sure.
And kind of following kind of like your career and learning a little bit about that. So what I always try to do is start off the podcast with a little bit about the guest, where do they hail from, or where do they kind of call their birthplace or their home? So before we get to that, though, I'm going to take a short little break to thank our sponsors. Folks, this show is sponsored by 1776 Insurance. We're talking about comprehensive firearms collection coverage. That also includes your accessories as well as knives. If you've got questions or you want to learn more, please visit 1776insurance.com. And we're back. So, where'd you grow up?
So I was born in Atlanta, Georgia. Ooh. Yeah, unexpected. And I only lived there for 3 or 4 years. Parents unfortunately separated. I moved to Tennessee with my dad and my grandparents. And we spent, I think, 8 or 9 years in Tennessee, East Tennessee, Johnson City, real pretty. And then we trekked south after my grandparents retired. They did the old normal, let's go to Florida. Worked out great for me because, Florida just happened to be a really nice spot to be, and we moved to a community down in Florida.
Nice.
And I spent another, I guess would have been 15, 16 years there before I moved out here. I moved out here in 2012.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Majority Florida.
Nice. So, I know I led with the crash at such an early age, but that's like you were really on a motorcycle at age 3, learning how to ride.
Well, this is a good story, actually. I'm really glad you did that research because I was learning how to ride, but my dad was riding me.
Yeah.
Right?
Interesting.
And to say that we grew up a little bit redneck would be an understatement. And I love the culture, but it was riding on the street, on a big hill, on a bike that was meant for dirt. Ooh. I had my dad's helmet on, so it was like basically a cardboard box on my head.
Like a big bell.
You know what I mean? I was like, what is this thing for? To sling my head around. And, I hope I don't butcher it. He's probably going to call me like, what? That's not what happened, but it is. I remember it pretty vividly. We go down this sharp corner. We go to another right hand, and the front tire slides out. And all I remember was bike making lots of noise on ground, helmet flying off. Obviously, it wasn't too secure. And then us, rolling and hitting into a dumpster.
Oh.
And at that point, I was like, never again.
Wow.
And I was a pretty quiet, reserved kid, too. Like,
sure.
I wasn't, I definitely wasn't taking big risk. And my son is the exact. Now I know that for a fact. I always thought that, but now the way my son is, I'm like, oh, okay, well, yeah, this is exactly how it was.
This makes sense.
And my dad was like, real into motorcycles. He never really raced or anything like that. I think he did a few races, but he, naturally wanted to get his son into whatever he liked.
Yeah.
And that ruined it.
Oh, no way.
That ruined it.
No.
Like, the thing just sat in I wasn't going to do it. You couldn't have glued me onto it.
Wow. So it was a combination of the crash and all the pressure?
It wasn't, I didn't really feel like I didn't really feel like there was a lot of pressure. I just there's a lot of noise that came along with that I can still hear to this day.
God,
you know what I mean? Like just that.
Well, as a young person, that has like a really that's a training scar for sure.
Training scar.
Yeah, I could easily see that. So the thing I like about our podcast is we always try to we're trying to focus in on things like you're successful. But what led to that success? Well, most of the time it's going to be like failures, obstacles that you had to overcome, lessons that you learned. And so starting your career that early in a sense and then walking away from it, what brought you back? What made you come back to that?
Well, I think my dad just kind of put the full court press on a little bit.
Huh.
And what I mean by that, not like, hey, you have to do it, but like, hey, this is your Christmas gift. You know what I mean? It's like, so I think I was like, 5, 6, 7 years old, somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
I got a little DS-80. It was either birthday or Christmas.
Nice.
And it's like, heck, if you want to use your Christmas present, you're going to need to ride it.
Yeah.
And at that point, I had kind of, matured. What I've learned through coaching kids, and especially in our Learn to Ride program where a lot of them are new, is the leaps that you make at that age from year to year is like huge. Totally different humans. You know what I mean?
True.
And so in that couple of year span, I had made a lot of progress. And that's what kind of taught me what we teach in our program of like, hey, some kids are ready at 3, some kids are ready at 4, some kids are ready at 5.
Wow.
And you have a pretty good read on it, right?
Yeah.
And we all are different. And I was just a little more ready for that experience then.
Gotcha.
I wasn't as afraid of the bike. I was willing to learn. Yeah. I didn't let fear take over as much.
Wow.
And so I got to going pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I think the first day that I rode it was in the snow.
No way.
Yeah, it was like a foot of snow. There's pictures. And obviously there was 2 great things about that. One, it was fun for me as a kid. 2, it didn't hurt when you fell.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
You know what I mean?
Fall in a big dust.
So I kind of learned to fall. Right? Or learn what the bike was going to do to make me fall with cushion. You know what I mean? But it was a lot harder to ride at that point.
Oh, I bet.
Because it was, it was pretty wild, but heck, falling was kind of fun.
Nice.
So that kind of got me over the hump. And, it took that experience to really be like, okay, this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And where we grew up, like that opportunity wasn't, it wasn't that often that you got to do cool stuff like that.
I can totally sympathize with that because I grew up in the 70s and 80s, so back then for me, it was BMX was the big thing, and we would go out to all the riding places, and we would just sit on the edges and watch the motocross guys coming out because they were like our idols. We were like, oh my God, someday I want to do that. Like watch them. They, they're getting so much air as they clear these jumps, and off our bikes we're getting like these this little puddles of sorts. And so I never forget like the first time, and it was one of my best friends, his brother was kind of who introduced us to, motorcycles. And so the dirt bike thing became like my parents wanted nothing to do with that. Like the only way I could ride is if I'm going to go sleep over at Dave's house. I'll be there for the weekend. And then we would go over to this.
All beat up.
Oh my God. Yes. But I had my bicycle to blame it on. So I'd be like, I fell off my bike, not the motorcycle. Yeah. So I went for 4 or 5 years doing that. Like we would just go out there, and I learned by watching those guys doing it, but I learned by falling, and I don't think I learned how to fall right. I don't think I did.
It's not a natural thing.
No,
right?
I don't think I learned how to fall right because that was also one of the things that kind of kept me from going further. Like I fell a couple hard times doing stuff, and I just was like, I think I'll stick to the bike.
Yeah, we experienced that, and that's kind of what we try to mitigate, right? Like, is that first what we call whiskey throttle experience.
Whiskey throttle.
So basically, whiskey throttle is where you forget to turn off the gas, which, as funny as it is, it happens way more than you think, right?
I bet.
And it's situational awareness, which I'm sure that you've had to experience a lot of times. And the more I study into people that were in the military or were in really peculiar situations, often it's like, how good can you perform at the things that feel really easy for you when your mind is totally distracted?
Yeah,
and that's really how good you are at things typically.
I like that.
You know what I mean? Is because like to go to the range in your case or to go to the practice track in my case, I can be 10 out of 10, good laps.
Yeah.
Pretty much all the time, but if you put someone my speed breathing down my neck and or put someone shooting back at you, you know what? You may not be following the 4 gun safety rules at that, but you know what I'm saying? And so
good. I like that. That's a good point.
And so what happens with new riders, because it is an overwhelming experience, is that they just forget like the most simple things. Right? The mind locks up.
Yeah.
And it just goes into fight or flight.
Totally relate to that.
We try to, in our program, mitigate that experience by really taking those first few steps very slow.
Yes.
And it's, we don't have very many of those experiences. which is nice. But if you just to go buy a bike off the showroom floor and put your 6-year-old on it, it's gonna happen. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not smart.
Well, I can easily. That's probably why my parents didn't want to have me anywhere near that, because in those early ages, my my risk versus reward meter was kind of lopsided. I took a lot of risks when I was younger, and I was very lucky. I healed well. The mistakes that I made were pretty, forgivable in some cases. And I kept kind of pushing until I found things that were kind of like really pushing me outside of my comfort zone. And I'd be like, oh, I need to back off a little bit. I've reached that threshold where now I recognize, oh, that can really be bad. I could really come out of this, probably not in a good way. So when you talk about it, like with kids now and kind of getting them into that program at such an early age, like how fortunate they are to have that kind of experience. And because of what I feel like that does for them is that really puts them on the right path to really find that passion for them and explore all the things that are exciting about motocross, but also all the things that are fundamentally part of life as well. Like, again, dealing with the fear and overcoming that fear and dealing with that, what happens when you get that brain lock and all of a sudden you need to kind of figure out how to deal with it. Those analogies that you're teaching these kids at such a young age, like you were saying, help to foster life choices that they're going to make down the road. So that's what I really was enamored. And we're going to get to the bride program in just a second or a little bit later, because I really like the idea behind that. I want to talk more about it. But so when we go back to your childhood and you're now basically riding on a regular basis, what was kind of like the trigger that launched you into, I want to do this professionally?
Well, to back it up a little bit, we kind of all lived together. My grandparents and my dad and myself, they were a really big part of my life. He was working a good bit and stuff like that. So my grandparents were just great grandparents. So they did a lot of the taking care of the day-to-day stuff. And my grandpa, who retired from military and served in World War II and all that good stuff, he loved golf, right? Like he naturally loved golf. And when we moved to Florida, we moved on a golf course.
Yeah.
And I played golf with him almost every day. And I was good.
Nice.
Like I was winning tournaments and at the pretty high level as a kid.
Wow.
And my grandpa wanted nothing more than me to continue to play golf, but I was also starting to race and really get into that side of life too.
Yeah.
Simultaneously.
Yeah.
That would be like on the weekends, my dad and I would get to spend that really good quality time together.
Yes.
Right. So not only was it fun for me, but it felt as if it was my bonding time with my father too.
For sure.
Which put a whole nother load on it,
Okay.
A positive one, I think, at that time. And so I basically had to come to this point where I had to decide between the two sports.
Ooh.
You know what I mean?
What age group was that?
I was about 9.
Oh, wow.
So I was getting pretty good on the dirt bike.
Yeah.
I was really good at golf.
Oof.
But they both took quite a bit of time. I don't know how much golf you've done, but you go play 18 holes, it's a 4-hour deal plus driving. It's a day.
Yeah. It is. It's a full commitment.
Experience. Especially if you're in school. It's like, what do you want to do after school? You only have so much time.
That's true.
And so it's like we either pursue this or we pursue that. You have potential in both.
Yeah.
I would say that I was better at golf by a pretty big margin.
Wow.
Yeah, than I was at moto. But as a kid, it's like it didn't give me that thing I was looking for.
Yeah.
Now I love to go play golf and relax. Like that's the other part of my life that's not adrenaline. It's still competitive, so I can go out there and try to improve or mess around with my buddies and talk crap to them. It's still fun in that aspect for me to this day, but at that time, especially when it was like, okay, let's either take it serious or back off. It's like serious for a kid. Golf is a hard sport to be serious about.
Interesting.
You know what I mean? Because it's so slow paced.
I know, yeah.
And you really have to love it. And I think at that point, subconsciously, I knew that I didn't really love it.
Gotcha.
Because I wasn't willing to go out and hit 500 balls in the afternoon.
Oof.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I go ride my dirt bike for sure.
Oh my gosh,
because it was fun.
I was just gonna say, if you gave me the choice between going to the golf range or going to the practice track, man, I would say probably like 99.9% of the times I would choose to go to the practice track.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like
my grandpa was pissed.
Yeah. my dad is an avid golfer, and that was something that we kind of did a little bit. but not nearly as much as I'm sure he wanted. But like the golf probably would not have fed that little monster in me that wanted to do stuff, that was energetic. I needed something exciting. I needed something that was going to kind of like fulfill a certain void in me. And so yeah, the golf thing probably would not have been my track as well, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it was like I said, I like to do it. In my whole neighborhood of buddies, we kind of lived in like, I don't even know if it was for sure a retirement community, but there was a lot of old people in there. You know what I mean?
Well,
so it felt like one.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of grandkids in there, and we all liked to go play golf. We all went to the same elementary school and things like that. And it was like either rollerblade hockey basically in the streets, or golf, or riding our bicycles. That was like our three things that we did.
Yeah.
Hindsight is 20/20, but looking back, I'm really glad that I went with motocross for multiple reasons. But I think all kids need something in their life that's hard and fun at the same time. And it's tough because, and not to knock on any ball sports at all, I just feel as if when you have backup, it can be a little easier for you.
What do you mean by backup?
When you have let's just say that I was this guy, but let's just say you're on a football team, and the football team's great, but you're not that great.
Yeah,
you're still categorized as great.
I gotcha. I'm
you know
tracking.
what I mean? If you have 6 people that are rock stars, and you're,
okay,
you can walk it in.
Yeah,
you can run behind them. And not to say that these sports are difficult.
Yes.
They do challenge kids, and they go the highs and lows of winning, just like you would. But when you're the only one,
yes,
you know what I mean, at a young age,
yes.
There's 2 things it can do. It's really good for kids if the parents understand how to give it to them.
Interesting.
Or really horrible for them if they let it be ego driven and they make it all about the win or the loss, and less about the journey.
Yes.
And so we try to kind of coach the parents just as much as we do the kids to understand, like, hey, look, this sport's wild. You know what I mean? It's wild.
Yeah.
And with anything that's wild without a little bit of structure, it's a mess.
Yeah, for sure.
And so we didn't have any of that structure. Luckily, I just turned out okay, I guess. But I learned what to teach people now, and that was a big part. But yeah, to go back to the golf thing, there's definitely days when I wake up and my knees hurt real bad. Where I'm like, I wonder if my knees would have hurt if I would have played golf.
Oh, I got you. Yeah. Probably not. Yeah, a couple of those hard falls probably would be a little bit easier on the body, or lack of those hard falls would probably be easier on the body. I did have a question for you on the choice between the golfing and the and riding bikes. Did you know that at that young of an age, that was it more about trying to find fun, or was it more about trying to find challenge?
I think it was a little more about fun at that age.
Okay.
Especially my motivation for sure.
Yeah.
And at that point, I hadn't been winning like a lot. Yet,
okay.
You know what I mean?
So I hadn't really
found the fun part of accomplishing goals, so to speak. So I was still kind of on the journey. And we went to practice, and I made a lot of friends at the track.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And this happens a lot, is like the kids get really into the experience outside of the riding.
Interesting.
Because you're camping almost every weekend.
Oh, yes.
Like most people that talk about going camping with their families, like, hey, we went twice a year or whatever, and it was the best thing ever. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you got to think about, 500 campers in a parking lot somewhere next to a track with all your buddies there. It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that is a tight-knit community.
It is a tight-knit community. And, it's competitive and stuff like that. But, we're cooking out at night, and the kids are running around on the little pit bikes and, chasing girls or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, it was a wild when I'm still experiencing. I don't go to the races as much as I used to by any means, but I still go there to learn and to help the riders and things like that.
Yeah.
And it's still the same way. Like,
No
we haven't outgrown that part of, everything's changed. I feel like even in the last few years, but in the last 10 years, it's like a polar opposite life for most people.
Interesting.
In just their everyday, what they do. And nothing has changed at the track since I was there.
That's good to hear.
And it's kind of an old school activity, I think.
Oh man, I love hearing that. So one of the things too that I feel for me as a kid, I like the idea that you framed it as a backup. like a team sport does have backup. You have the luxury of other players to help bring you along, whatever the case might be. One of the things that I learned when I was young was I played team sports pretty much all my young formative years, and it wasn't until high school that I got into like individual sports like swimming. And I didn't I think I missed out on trying to better myself, internally. Everything that I was doing on team sports was to better the team. Now, by proxy, you would say, okay, well, then you are bettering yourself in some respects. But it wasn't until I got into that high school period that I started to figure out, like, what do I need to do to better me, to improve myself? Was that kind of like the same experience that you had?
I mean, I'm still having that to this day.
Love it, man.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like you learn these things as they come, but you also like are able to reflect on certain periods of your life where you're like, wow, that's why that didn't work that way. And or that's why that relationship went that way. Or it's all intertwined,
I love hearing that.
So
you're about like early teens at this point?
Early teens. I started really getting into the racing thing, call it 9, 10, 11 years old, and started getting pretty good.
Yeah.
And so that led me into the early teens there. Yeah, we were racing quite a bit.
So I know that your grandfather was probably upset because of your choice, but did you guys still did that affect your relationship in any way?
Well, they passed away.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear
my
that.
grandmother passed away when I was 11, I believe, and then my grandfather at 12. So it was like 2 kind of back-to-back years.
That's a rough one.
So at that point, too, it's like, you go to the things that make you feel the least amount of pain typically. Right?
That's a good point.
And so I think I even got more into it. You know what I mean? Whether it was a distraction at that point.
Yes.
And or, I just found more motivation, I would probably lean more towards the distraction knowing what
Comfort,
I know now. Comfort.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we kind of doubled down.
Wow.
On the riding and racing and figuring out training and things like that. When I was growing up, there wasn't coaches. There just wasn't coaches.
Yeah.
We may had one in Florida that was decent.
Yeah.
That is questionable to leave your kids with, kind of thing. It's like looking back, I'm like, you left me with him? You know what I mean? Like, well, it's a good damn thing I'm here still. He may be good on a dirt bike, but what about the rest of his life?
Oh my God!
So so there was that. There just wasn't many options, and you got what you got. But we kind of doubled down on it, and so for the next few years, it was pretty much all we did.
Is there so when you were that young, kind of learning the sport, and obviously you were kind of the coaching, as you mentioned, wasn't there at the time. What were you doing for yourself daily to kind of help the growth part of your passion there? What was it? Was there something that you did on a regular basis, maybe not daily, but on a regular basis that fueled that?
Yeah, if I wasn't riding, I was like jogging or, I had that mindset pretty early that training was necessary.
Yeah.
Now, when I was coming up, it was like the Jeremy McGrath era, Jeff Emig, and these guys like partied and still won somehow.
How does that happen?
It doesn't work like that anymore. It's way more competitive now. There's no single person that's a lot better than everyone else back then.
Yeah.
Like his talent was on another level. Obviously, he trained and rode, but there was now you can't get away with doing cocaine the night before and winning the race the next day. Like, it ain't gonna happen, Back then, what they would call the glory days.
Yeah.
Those guys were wild, but I always knew, and I was like a little bit more of like a chubby kid too, right? And I knew that you needed to be fit. It's a very physically demanding sport. And I remember one time, there's a race called Loretta Lynn's, right? And it was like the pinnacle to make this race. It was on Loretta Lynn's ranch every year. And basically you qualify down to the fastest 40 in the country.
Oof.
Right? Which is, starts from thousands.
That's intense.
It's tough. And it was like my goal to make that. And one year I was kind of like on the brink and I started training for the race, right? And so think about the first qualifier, I call it January, February. That'd be your area. Then your regional, which is kind of, it gets it to a smaller group of people, is in, March, April, May, and then you race in August.
Okay.
And so after the area, I won.
Nice.
Right? I'm like, oh, this is a good sign.
Yeah.
And, as it started getting hot out, March, it's pretty much hot always in Florida. But
yeah, that's true.
I remember I was going on jogs after school, and because I was hearing all these rumors of how hot it was at Loretta's, I would get in my grandpa's Toyota Camry after my jog and just turn the heat full blast. right? And just sit in there. Like before saunas were cool, the Camry.
The Camry was doing it for you.
Yes.
Did you
And
wear
I
a
remember my
tracksuit, too?
grandpa coming out like, what in the hell are you doing? You know what I mean? Like, you're going to die in here. I'm in here just getting sweat all over his seats.
Oh.
I'm like, I'm training. So
I'm
training. I had the mindset of like, you must
that.
work to be good. And I think my dad was a proponent of that. And so, yeah, I was doing what I thought was the right thing, probably killing myself slowly. But, you know, I was the only kid in the neighborhood that was going on volunteer jogs.
That's crazy.
After school.
Yeah,
right?
that's
and I'm like,
crazy.
well, you guys just play baseball. You don't need to do that. You know, not that I think that you don't need to be fit. You obviously do. But that was my mindset back then. It's like, this is the hardest sport in the world. And if I don't do this, I'm just going to get beat all the time.
So the interesting thing about that is the corollary, the importance behind, you know, you could be really good at your activity, but you will at some point reach a threshold unless your physicality can actually match that or that technical ability. And when you figure out, like I think you were saying, like in these days, the competitiveness within your field is probably so tight. You're talking seconds between riders, that what's really given them that extra edge is nothing more than just having that extra durability or endurance to kind of go harder, longer than their opponent. And that there's a lot that can be achieved in that skill development, like being on the bike. But at the same time, we've started to figure out that I have to train to help me train better over on this side. And, you know, we talk about it in our world as well. You know, the self-defense world, when people ask me what can I do to help be better prepared for, in a self-defense scenario. And a lot of times the answer they're looking for is like, well, should I buy a gun? Should I learn how to train? Should I do this? And most of the time my recommendation is, well, be smart about your surroundings, know where you're at, know what's around you, and probably get healthy, be healthier. Cause that's also going to be a huge benefit to you. You
may have to run away someday.
I would like to think that if you have to run, that you can run faster than the bad guy that's chasing you. So that's probably not a God-given talent for a lot of us. We've got to work on that. So my recommendation to a lot of people is, the health aspect doesn't just help you in your skill, it helps you in life in general, across the board. Like I want to be around for my kids, grandkids, and I want to be able to do the things like your grandparents did for you. And that means that I've got to start thinking about the long game versus all the damage I did to my body in the short game. So I'm paying for it now for sure. But when you talk about like jogging as a everyday thing that you did to try to improve your skill, do you still do that these days, or is there something else you do? Good for you, man.
I don't jog because of my knees are a little. I'm not going to talk to them poorly because I know they're listening. But they give me feedback that I don't necessarily love. And we're working together on improving.
I love hearing that. That's good.
So, I still, I just kind of got back into lifting some heavier weights, and, my body's been kind of beat up. And so it's like I'm in between like the hot yoga and the lifting weights, and I really like to mountain bike.
Nice.
For the cardio side of things, and I still ride.
Nice.
And so those are really where I'm at right now. I'm kind of like trying to get back into this lifting phase and get some strength again. Because for the longest time, I didn't. I just mountain biked.
Yeah.
I just did a lot of long cardio.
Yeah.
And honestly, knowing what I know now, I was kind of beating my body up a little bit. I was never recovering very well.
Oh, man.
Probably not eating enough for what I was doing. And I think it messed my metabolism up a bit, I think, in not eating correctly for what I was doing. And so, I've just been studying the different paths of food and understanding how my body feels and trying different things. And I kind of finally feel like I've found a place where I really feel good.
Yeah.
And I can train again at a higher level.
And it's funny too, because early on in my career, I did what everybody else was doing. And I didn't ask, like, is this the right thing for me? I just kind of followed what everybody was doing because that was what everybody did. And I didn't know enough to ask questions like, should I be trying to do that? Should I be trying to do something different? Because my body style, most of the guys that I was in my early days, most of the guys that I was with were much bigger and much stronger. So me trying to do the same thing that they were doing wasn't really working well for me, and it discouraged me from trying to do anything at that point. I was like, well, screw it. I'm just going to stick to what I'm good at over here, which didn't allow me to grow over here. And it took me a long time before I came back to lifting heavy as well. And, you know, I kind of like, damn, I wish I had just asked questions or figured out what would work for me at a younger age. Because for me, strength building was something that I shunned early on just because, man, I can't do what these guys are doing. I just, why bother?
Mm-hmm.
And it took some time, but like I had to also figure out what I can do with the injuries that I have right now. Like, you know, it was, I call it, you know, you're what I would consider to be a high mileage athlete, just like myself. And so I got to find things that work for me nowadays. And, you know, it's a trial and error kind of thing most of the time, but, you know, I've got some pretty decent feedback from a lot of guys. I like how you talk to your body parts gently and try to get them to cooperate with you.
I feel like they get pissed about it.
Oh, man, let me tell you.
I mean, I might be limping out of here if I start talking to you. So
I feel the same way when I wake up in the morning. I'm like, okay, let's see. What body part? Oh, let's go over this way to start. Let me ask you something about your childhood. What was the hardest part about growing up?
Well, the whole thing was quite the sham. No. The hardest part for me was we moved around a good bit between my dad and my grandparents, and you know, I moved out pretty early. We can get into that phase, but you know, I moved out when I was 16.
Ooh,
kind of put everything. That was a part of your background that you couldn't find on the internet, right there.
That's true.
But you know, we can chat about that. I don't have any problems talking about that. But you know, I think the hardest part was just feeling like I was going to school and feeling like I was meant to be there. You know, because I had this great relationship with a lot of people outside of school. But at school, I just didn't feel like I had a ton in common with the kids. And it wasn't even necessarily the sport. It was just my outlook, you know? And I think the sport and I try to tell parents this, the sport can make it harder for people to sit still in school, too, because they're so adrenaline, you know. They've got these dopamine hits on another level than most kids can experience. And it's hard when you are forced to sit down and do what people tell you when you're you know, it's reality, and I get it all the time, like, oh, little Johnny's, you know, he can't do this in school. I'm like, well, what is he doing outside of school? Right? What are you putting him through, or her?
Good point.
It's like, man, you cannot match this level of adrenaline, dopamine, all of this. It's insane what they're experiencing when they're out there jumping 100 feet on, you know, like they're doing stuff that's so fear-based, but once they get through it, it's like this rush of, you know, beat your chest.
Definitely.
It's like, who wants to add after that?
Where do you go next?
You know what I mean? So I feel like that there's that balance that these kids, especially in even adults, really, because we're all on this dopamine fix. And I think that there's this balance that we need, like, okay, this is, one, you don't get it easily, and two, you got to have the other side that kind of settles you down a little bit. You need to have whatever it is. If you're into meditation, or if you're just freaking walks in the woods, or whatever, you need to have. And for me, golf is a good thing for that, because it's calm.
It is.
I can't be forced. I can't go fast. Now, don't get me wrong. I will hit you with my golf cart, especially if it's a public course, and I know I'm not getting fined for the golf cart.
So if I see 254 on the golf court, I need to run?
Well, if you see tire marks down the side, you know I was there. Especially if I'm getting beat, you know, it's like I'll win one way or another. But you know, it's one of those things where I think that it was hard for me. You know, it was hard, and I was not even like an anxious, you know, real rambunctious kid, but I was constantly being trained to be this.
I never thought of it that way.
You know,
I never thought of looking at that, because I have very similar attributes when we would go on the weekend. Like, that was when we would ride. Like, we would go to a friend's house who had a half pipe in his backyard, and we would do stuff there. But that was okay. It was more of the weekends when we'd go out to these practice tracks, or these secluded hills that we had near where we lived. And that's where I would kind of like let loose. So I never thought about what was I doing other than that during the weekdays, to kind of, because I had the same problem in school, man. I was just like a ball of energy sitting in the classroom, just couldn't wait to get out of class. And I never thought about, well, what was I doing to try to help bring some sort of balance to everything that I was doing. Like weekends was a little wild at times, but what was I doing on the weekdays? Because that was hard. Like I felt like I was like a square peg trying to fit into a round hole, and sitting still for me was like torture. Like just straight up, I would rather do anything other than that. You know, I can remember many times my teachers would just tell me to just walk, and I would pace in the back of the classroom. But I would listen. I would actually be able to pay attention because I was doing something that occupied a part of my brain that allowed me to then open up the other part of the brain to actually listen to what was being put out. And when that one teacher figured it out, it was nice, but none of my other teachers did though, so I was kind of screwed in the rest of my classes.
You know, but they're not taught to.
That's true.
They're not taught to.
They're
taught like here's what we need to get the kids to learn.
Yeah.
You're required to teach them.
Yeah.
You know, they're not talking about the different psychologies of different kids.
That's a whole other can of worms there. But let me ask you this other question. When you're basically training up and you're in the race, you're getting into that racing format. When you decided to go, because I know that you were in school and then you decided that school wasn't for you. And was it because you were more interested in pursuing the racing that you realized that school wasn't for you, or did you just get burnt out on school?
You know, homeschool was a big thing back then.
Really?
For kids, so they could ride every day.
Oh, I didn't even think of it that way. Yeah.
And what happens a lot of times is, you know, there's races that are week-long races.
Oof.
Right? And most of them are on school breaks and stuff like that. But even if you go to a weekend race and practice is on Friday and it's halfway across the country,
oh goodness,
you really need to leave Wednesday night.
Yep.
And you're not getting back till Tuesday night or Tuesday morning, right? So it was one of these things where I didn't love school. I think mainly because a little bit what we talked about. Also, I switched around, so I never really had that group of people that I felt connected with.
Yeah.
You know, if you're at a place for a year or even 2 years is tough, right, to really get your click. And so I never really settled in. I wasn't that good at school, too. You know, like it was work to get all A's and B's and kind of stay up to where the standards that, you know, because if I didn't get good grades, I wasn't riding. Ouch. You know, so it was tough to do that. And so, long story short, it's just one of those things where I think that for me, I just didn't feel as if it was the place for me. You know what I mean? Like, and I talked my dad into homeschooling, probably not, like, because it really was just me, like, disciplining myself to do it, which was tough.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's a hard jump. Yeah.
I got some of it done. Like, I think I did a whole almost year. But like things just felt more important. I was pretty good at riding at that point, like maybe top 5 in the country in my class. Wow. And so like we were at that brink where it's like, you know, maybe school's fine, but what if you become a pro or whatever, you know what I mean? Yeah. And you can turn pro at 16.
Yes.
And so you really could start making pretty decent living if you're good enough at 16, which is very rare.
That is by
the way.
Yeah.
It's even rare in our sport that anyone does it. But we had this pipe dream, you know, because locally I was better than everyone else. Wow. And that's another misconception that I think a lot of parents have with their kids in sports is like, if little Johnny or little Susie are rock stars, you know, here in Cedar Park, just take them to Dallas and let everyone from the whole state come there and let's see where they're at. If they're rock stars there, then just take them to a national event. And then, you know, there's a lot of rock stars. There's a lot of people that are talented and a lot of people that are good. And we learned that the hard way.
Yeah.
One, we didn't have a lot of money to travel. You know, a lot of kids I was racing locally, we'd hear like, oh, they got third at Loretta's and you beat them, so that means you must be second. You know, like, you know, that mindset. I think a lot of fighters have that. Well, that guy, you know, he beat him, so technically, you know,
and I beat that guy,
I beat that guy, so I'm better than both of them. And so we kind of had that mindset.
Interesting.
And I think it kind of messed us up because when I did start racing on like the real big national level, it was a little bit of like, oh, maybe I'm not as good as I thought. You know what I mean?
Well, now you're really seeing like, you know, it's so funny that you say that because when you got to that level, when you were all of a sudden like really competing against other people at your level, at your peer level, did that kind of like force you back or did that draw you forward?
was an interesting part of my life because it was right around 14, 15. And I broke my femur when I was 13, and then I broke the other one when I was 14. So that set me back a little bit. So I have titanium rods in both my femurs, but so injuries were kind of becoming a little more prevalent, and I think it was because it was getting more competitive and I was pushing myself a little too hard. Going back to probably not being recovered correctly, and it's just little mental errors. The femurs are actually, what I say to this day, not my fault. One, the bike cut out on the top of the jump, and it was still a mystery of why.
Ooh.
Right? So if you got to jump 70 feet and your bike cuts out for a second, you're only going 65.
Oh, nice.
You know what I mean? And if it's peak landing, you obviously are going to land on the front side or the back side.
Yeah.
And so we can tell, if you want some good injury stories, we can get into that later.
Oh, no, thanks. Yeah.
But that one was bad.
Oh, man. Oof.
Yeah, have you ever broken any bones like that?
Not a femur. Not a femur. That's a big bone to break.
Yeah, it sounds like a gun going off.
Oh, yeah.
Actually,
I've heard them.
I didn't hear that, but
I've actually heard them. Maybe not a femur break, but I have heard those bones break from the side, and you know exactly what it is. You kind of can hear it. It's like when a head hits a concrete or a solid surface, you hear that noise. You know exactly what that is. Same thing. So yeah, I just get the oof.
But to answer your question, I think that the injuries kind of slowed me down.
Okay.
At that point, and you lose a little when you're bound up. And now, obviously, what I know about narcotics and pain medicine, how it can completely change who you are. Luckily, I didn't get addicted to any of it.
Oh, nice.
There's a lot of people in our sport that have, and it's not been good for them. But it just those couple years were tough in general.
Yeah.
And you don't get to. It's very much so a sport where you're only as good as your last race. You know what I mean?
True. So true.
If you won last week and everyone wants to talk to you on Monday, but if you're not there, you're just gone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? No one's calling you. No one cares. And that's
that's like life too.
That's like life.
It is so true. I mean, I had the hardest time dealing with that, and I'm so glad you brought that up because, I had good track record, excelled at just about everything, but I got kind of caught on my laurels thinking that was who I was. Instead of constantly pushing myself, I had more of like a fall back on my heels than lean forward on my toes attitude. And, it took me a while to kind of sort through that. Eventually, once I did, I mean, it wasn't too late, but it cost me in a lot of, like you said, it's like one of those things that you're just, everybody else is passing you and you can't understand why.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, it pisses you off.
Yeah. And it happens a lot.
Yeah.
It happens a lot. I mean, I remember many weekends, and you get so competitive with just certain people, too.
Oh, sure.
You know
your arch rival.
You're like, freaking Michael?
I can beat him with one leg.
And then, dads don't help either because they're the captain of, you can beat that kid.
Andrew, if you're listening, Andrew and Alex, I'm so sorry. Those are my kids. I'm so sorry.
Sorry, Andrew and Alex. I'll tell you. Because I see it so often where it's like, dude, maybe he just got a little better.
Yeah.
Maybe that kid improved.
Yeah.
And, we all go on these highs and lows, and we just slowly go up as we're going high and low. And maybe you just met a high when you were going low. And it's like, man, I tell you what. These parents are crazy.
Yeah. Quick word from our sponsor. We've been working with the folks at 1776 for comprehensive insurance of our firearms collections, and I'm really happy with how things are going so far. And one of my concerns is with the amount of commuting that I do with my firearms collection. What happens should my vehicle be broken into or stolen with my firearms? And there's reason to have this concern because there's 800,000 vehicles stolen per year in America. So it's not, it's a little bit more common than we might think. What I mentioned earlier is that they have a comprehensive insurance plan, which is that they will cover your firearms stolen out of your vehicle, or should your vehicle be stolen, cover the firearms that were in the vehicle. So that's pretty reassuring in a sense. So I've mentioned this before, but the process to apply is pretty easy. Approval is pretty quick. They do not require you provide a itemization or serialized numbers. There's no appraisal or schedules that you have to provide. So really all you want to do is just make sure you have proof of ownership, and that's it. So if you want to learn more about the folks from 1776 and insuring your firearms collection, visit 1776insurance.com. Let me speaking of that. So like now that you're a parent and looking and seeing parents come in, how do you contend with that?
Well, my son is a lot like I was, but I'm less like my dad was.
Interesting. Okay.
And not to say that he was bad. He was doing the best he could with what he knew.
For sure.
And I can see that my son's going to need a little pushing to do, like we were just learning to ride bicycles just the other day. And to me, that's like an important thing. That's like one thing you learn. And one of the things that you must know how to do in life, right? Is like,
I agree.
Eventually, your buddy's going to hop on a bicycle, and if you can't go with him, it's not going to be a happy day for you.
Yeah.
Or, well, heck, maybe you want to live in a city one day, and that's how you get around. But he didn't not want to do it because he loves riding his Strider bike around, right? And so I know that he likes the experience of what it feels like and things like that, but he didn't want to do the pedal bike. And I knew it was simply because he was afraid to do it.
Interesting.
He was afraid like that. And I'm trying to, we're still learning each other, obviously. Like he's changing every day, and I'm trying to pay attention to the way he interacts with life and do the best I can. But I also know that he will hold back if he's not sure he can do it.
Yes.
And so it was one of those things where it's like we had to come up with like a mission plan, basically.
Interesting.
Like, here's what we're going to do in the morning, and this is going to set this up for this, and then we're going to go out here, and we're going to just ride around here for a little bit. We're going to go to this hill. We're going to go down it 10 times, and then, we set up, and he did it, and he learned to ride, and it was, it was great. He hasn't really necessarily showed a lot of interest since, so I think but I know he knows when he does that he'll be able to hop on and go.
Yeah. Totally
okay with me. And so, I don't know. Yeah, I think it's just one of those things where you get it as you come kind of thing,
Well, it's true. I mean, like, I imagine the hard part is as a parent, you want what's best for your kid, but sometimes you're also, you kind of forget that it's your kid's life. It's not, you're just there to observe it. You're there to participate in it, but it's their life to live. And I know that was kind of hard for me sometimes, like I wanted more for them because I wanted them to have more than I did. So like I had to kind of like pull back a little bit. It took some time to mature as a father myself before I figured it out. And I'm still trying to sort it out even to this day because my boys are early 20s. So it's a never-ending cycle of learning. And like I like how you use the term, I'm still learning him. I'm still learning him in a sense. And that was incredibly wise in a sense. I didn't think of looking at the kids like that. Like I need to learn them versus them learning me.
Yeah, 100%. I think they're probably the biggest teachers in the world, right? Like
I've
if
never
you pay
thought
attention.
That's a good point.
Because they're so pure and innocent. You know what I mean?
For
like
sure.
Especially at that age. He's only 4. It's like he hasn't been tainted yet.
Yeah.
And I like to experience life through his eyes as much as I can because I'm like, oh, that's what it's supposed to feel like.
Yes.
And so, but also there's a balance there where it's like, hey, some days you're gonna have to freaking put your own shoes on, dude. You know what I mean? Like you can put your socks and shoes on.
Yeah.
I've been doing it for 4 years because you couldn't then.
Yeah.
You can do it now.
Guess what? It's on you now.
It's on you.
It's on you.
And so I think that it's important for us to understand is like, you are right. We are just we're just kind of going along with them. You know what I mean? They're going to make their path.
Well, the good news for me was when I finally figured it out, it was awesome because, I did get a chance to watch them grow and turn into young men. And clearly there's a lot of work that I need to do for still on my end. But the way that we've kind of started to interact together now is as not as father-son, but more as kind of like, I guess, like co-men. They're young men, I'm an older man, so we're kind of like co-menning together of sorts.
That's got to be a new word.
I know, right? It's so cool. Hashtag.
Co-men. Trademark that for us. Okay.
Paul, make sure you do that for me.
Paul, thanks, Paul.
Yeah, Paul, again for Paul. So when you get into the racing circuit and you're the homeschool changed your ability to do that, but it also kind of meant that you weren't the only real, like, I guess it's hard to live on the road like that as a young kid. You don't have good connections with young people your age to kind of grow with. You have these acquaintances that you see on the circuit every now and then, and some of those acquaintances are also opponents, so you got to also factor that in. Mm-hmm. Like when did it all of a sudden turn into a job?
Well, I quit riding around 16 for a couple of years because I had to figure out how to eat.
That'll do it.
And
little incentive
at that point. the one thing I look back and is like, man, I always had people that were willing to take care of me though, or like willing to help me out. And I think that just comes from, when I moved out, it was a little bit of a shaky situation, just probably my dad and I disagreeing on things that people disagree on, or me not wanting to be in a setting that I thought was kind of unhealthy or whatever. And, there's a little more to that story, but ultimately I had to figure out how I was going to survive, and so dirt bikes became a lot less important.
I could see that. So this was at 16?
16.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't even have my license yet. Luckily, Dean Driggers took me to get my license. He was a buddy of mine's dad who kind of let me move in. I was kind of working for him on his ranch a little bit.
Nice.
And hanging out. His son was homeschooled through racing too, so it kind of worked out. We were both around. Really, we just kind of worked at the ranch, and I didn't do any school. At that point, I was like officially a high school dropout, for the most part. And so it just kind of I started my adult life pretty early.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I got an opportunity to work at a gym, actually, ironically. A guy I met through motocross years prior, somehow got a hold of him. This was really before social media. I kind of was like, man, I was like, how did I talk to these people? And I ended up working at his gym. He had a little apartment up above it. And I would, kind of just clean up the gym, sweep up, rack the weights, and, just be there to help or whatever. And he let me stay in the apartment above it. He had one stipulation that I got my GED at the very least.
Nice.
And so he kind of forced me back through the process of getting that done. And so that was like his stipulation to work there. And then I started riding again after I kind of got my life settled down a little bit, if you will.
Okay.
It wasn't bad. Like when I look back to most people, that experience would have been like super bad for them, but it wasn't that bad. Like it was a little bit scary, but I think I had been so used to doing scary things,
right,
that all my life that I was like, it'll work out.
Yeah.
I had that mindset. Yeah, it'll be fun. I wish I could still keep that as much as I did when it was really wild. Now I have a house and car. Like everything's kind of a little more organized and a little more secure. Back then it was like, I wonder if I'm going to eat this afternoon, And I was like, I'm sure something will come up.
Oh, my God, that's awesome.
I try to remember that. I'm like, hey, you still have that human inside you that knows it's going to be okay no matter what. You just got to think back to what you're doing then. And so, anyways, that brings us up to about 17, 18 years old. That was a pretty rough 2-year phase, just as far as like so much learning.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. Right in your face, too. It's like all right there.
Yeah.
Ooh. So you do you think it was that 2-year hiatus from writing that, again, trying to figure out what your life, like the priorities, you reprocess priorities, like you said, was it that ability to kind of manage through that adversity that then gave you the incentive to go back to racing or writing? So
I think when you become good at something, you can never divorce it.
Know that.
Because it becomes a little bit of your identity. And I think because of the situation, moving out and stuff, like that was my identity. That was like what me and my father did. And so I think part of me resented it for a while. And until I had to come to terms with like, hey, look, it's not the sport's fault. It's not your fault. It's not your dad's fault. It's just like the way life went, the decisions were made. And it is what it is. Yeah. And after I kind of came to terms with that, I started riding again, found a bike, things like that. And then I had the industry caught wind that I was riding, and I had a track owner that was starting his own series that was ended up being a really cool, where I did most of my pro racing was within this series. He called me and said, hey, I want you to ride my bike. I'll sponsor you for the year and give you a bike to race. And that was like 21 weekends a year.
Holy cow.
And so I was like, well, I need to make money too. And so I kind of started doing the coaching thing around that point, 17, 18.
Wow.
Yeah. So I moved from where I was at that gym down closer to the track where we did all our racing. Started doing a little coaching, and then was making my money racing on the weekends at that point.
Wow.
So then it went totally flipped from working in a gym. And then I was working in a carbon fiber shop, building carbon fiber parts for motorcycles and stuff like in the morning. And then I would come in the afternoon when school let out, and I would manage the gym until we kind of closed down. It was a 24-hour gym, so it never closed. So that was half the reason I was there. Is like,
somebody
I
had to
could
be
there
at
midnight or whatever. They have a problem.
Yeah.
They're going to knock on my apartment door or whatever.
Gotcha.
And so moving into, then I just flip-flopped and went right back into like race mode, which was tough after that many years off.
2 years off?
2 years off. And right when I got back into it, I dislocated my ankle pretty bad. And so
while you were racing?
I was just practicing.
Oh, okay.
Another bike cut out on the face of a jump. I don't mess around with that anymore.
Yeah.
It's like my bike needs to be perfect.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was a pretty tough one. That took a while to recover from. So I kind of moved down there and I was like, dang, what do I do now? You know? And then, you know, kind of got healed up. It started racing, started doing really well in that series. So then I was actually able to like make a little money.
Yeah.
You know, until then I was like living on someone's couch basically. Thank the Keelons for saving me at that point. Their kid raced professionally. He was really good. And so, you know, I think people always saw, one, I didn't party. Like I wasn't the kid that moved out because I was being rebellious. I was the kid that moved out because I wanted to do the best that I could. And if the environment felt off, I didn't want to be in it.
Interesting.
And so I never drank. I never did any type of drugs. I never partied. I never did any of that. I was actually on the other end of the spectrum where I was a little bit psychotic on the other side of it. You know what I mean? Like on the training
rush.
side
Yeah.
and like trying to figure out like what's the best path in life and for me and trying to be healthy for what I knew what health was at that point. But the sport taught me a lot of that. And so, you know, it worked out where people would take me in because they knew I wasn't necessarily a liability.
Oh, that's a good point. I mean, yeah, you know, they recognize there's value, that you have potential, and so they recognize that it's worth it. You know, there was something that you said that kind of caught my attention too, which was you know, like when you went back to the sport when you started racing again, that hiatus that you had, you know, you couldn't really walk away from your identity as far as, you know, that was what you were supposed to be doing. Like the challenge that I've had for myself in moving away from my military career was, that it was hard for me to get away from that.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter what I tried to do, there was always a path that led me back to something similar to it.
Mm-hmm.
Was that kind of like preordained for you that you were going to come back to racing no matter what, or did you kind of like make it happen because that's what you wanted to do?
I felt like it was probably going to happen. Like when I was in the gym,
yeah,
everyone in there thought I was training to race.
Oh, really?
Like that's what in my mind.
Huh?
Like even though I had like I was kind of a forced quit.
Yeah.
It's expensive sport.
That's yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so if you don't have help, it's tough. And so I was like, when I was lifting weights or training, it was like, okay, well, eventually this will be for that.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily like I'm trying to get swole.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
And even people like that was still what people coined to me on, around there, like, yeah, he's a motocross racer. And for, 2 years, it was zipped by pretty fast when you're trying to figure things out.
Yeah, they do.
And so, to answer your question, yeah, I had full intentions of doing it again.
Man, nice.
You know what I mean? It was just, I was.
You were ready to go back to it?
I was ready.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had the fire in me.
Nice.
And I was definitely ready to do it.
So, for a lot of people, trying to live vicariously through you in the sense of like what it is to be a motocross racer, like what was that like? Like how, like what did it look like to like the train up, the prep for the race, the after the race, the post race stuff? Like what was all that like for you?
Well, just to give you let's just lay out a week for you.
Exactly.
Yeah, and
exactly.
Like what a normal professional racer is going to do during the week. Now it's a little different because everyone's smarter now, right? So there's like we used to ride 6-7 days a week, where guys will ride, at least take 2 days a week off.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how much you know about it, but at the pro level, like when you drop the gate to the end, it's max heart rate. And that's no exaggeration. I remember coming off, we wear heart rate monitors and things like that. I remember coming off for 40 minutes and my heart rate being average 198.
Holy shit.
It's much harder than it looks on the body. You got to think about, imagine you weighting your barbell to 225 and just yanking it around for 40 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You've got 240 pounds underneath you that is just, it's like it's trying to kill you.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so you got to train for it, but now I think we're smarter in the sense of like recovery is very important, like understanding the body, eating correctly, things like that. But to give you a rundown, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is training.
Yeah.
Friday off, Saturday race, Sunday recovery, bicycle ride, typically like a zone 2 hour and a half bicycle ride.
Nice.
Monday, start maybe doing a little light training on the bike. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, real hard.
Wow.
And then
repeat.
Yeah, so there's not really any days. Not really any days off. Your days off are your recovery days, which are still some form of work.
You're working on the bike. You're working on something.
Yeah, and if you've got to work on your own bikes, if you don't have a mechanic, dude, it went from 8-hour days to 12-hour days because it is a lot of work of just getting loaded up, you know. And I think that's why I kind of fell in love with riding mountain bikes, is because it's so much easier.
Oh, sure.
Right? It's like throw the bike in the truck. You got a helmet, some shoes, and some whatever. You're good. With a dirt bike, you've got to load your gear bag, clean your gear. There's a lot that goes into a gear bag, and you understand this. Yeah. And it's like gas can, stand, tools, you know, lubricants. And if you forget one thing, the whole day is shot, you know? Don't forget the bike and prepping the air filter. And the oil has to be done every time. You got to clean it every time. Tighten the spokes. I mean, check the bolts. It's like, if you're not good enough to where you can hire a mechanic, it is, which a lot of people are on that
cusp.
I didn't have one for the longest time.
Oh, wow.
Heck, I think I've had one more now, not racing professionally. You know, people work on my bikes for me now, and I'm like, I would never ride if you weren't doing that. Trust me. You know?
Oh, God.
But back then, you know, it just, we came up with like, no, you do it yourself.
Yeah, for sure.
You want it done right, you do it yourself.
Yeah.
You know? I'm like, well, I've about killed myself about 4 times with this bike cutting out on jump phases. I think someone more qualified should
do it. Oh, God.
Yeah, but it's a busy schedule, and the guys that are racing for money, you know, I never made it to the level where it was like millions of dollars on the line. And those guys got it a little easier, but the pressure is high.
I was just going to say, there's got to be a flip side to that.
There's a flip side to it. And a lot of obligations, sponsor obligations, and, you know, whatever.
Your time.
Podcast and, you know, interviews and whatever. And so they've got that end of it. But they run ragged, man. They typically will retire around 28.
Oh, jeez.
Which, then what?
Yeah. So like you mentioned earlier that you had in an effort to kind of help make ends meet, started coaching back in, you know, the early part. Were there a lot of coaches back then?
No, there wasn't, especially good ones. There's a questionable, like I said, like, you gonna let your kid go with him? But no, I just started kind of taking on coaching jobs. Like if someone was running a camp, I'd come in and help. And then a track started letting me do like a Wednesday night training every week. Nice. That was pretty successful. And so I kind of just started, you know, when you first start coaching, you're just telling people what you do, you know. But when you become a real coach, you're telling people what is the right thing to do.
That is beautiful. Let's say that again for the audience, please.
Yeah, trademark that. No.
But that's so true, you know. And I, you know, when we are training up and coming instructors in our instructor level courses, you know, a lot of times that's exactly what happens, is that they do what they know how to do, and then it takes time before they can figure out how to be a good coach, a firearms coach, and what that means. Because, you know, you just like you've got every walk of life coming through your door, and they've got all their different needs and all their different limitations that you got to somehow balance and make it so that they have a positive experience, so they want to come back and do it again. You know, there is that goes into it. So, but that means that you've been coaching for a while now.
A long time.
Yeah. And as you've been coaching that side of the sport, how's that matured?
It's coming a long way.
Yeah.
We're finally getting to the point where I think people are catching on to the right structure of coaching.
Interesting. What do you mean by structure?
Our sport doesn't have, like, firearms is really, like, you could die easily.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
True. Very good point.
And so I feel like, especially getting into that world with Dwayne's been kind of training me and things like that. It's very like, hey, this is step A, and way down here is step Z. And if you skip out on B, Z doesn't work very well, or it's dangerous.
Yeah.
We've never really had that until now.
Interesting.
Right? Like, I'm probably I'm the first one to put a structured program where you start with your footwork and you work through your whole body, and then you start adding in elements like the conditions, the track, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And basically having a step-by-step process in order to gain really great technique.
So let's talk about your program, because that is one of the things that I think is outstanding and awesome, and I want to share that with people. When did that seed start to grow?
So my buddy and I moved out to Texas to run a track, not necessarily to coach. And so when I moved away from Florida, I started working for a social media company that looked a lot like Facebook for motocross. So the platform looked a really great concept, I think just way too early.
Interesting.
Like I think if you would have launched it like 2 years ago, it probably would have gotten really big.
Nice.
But that was back in 2011 when we kind of started off on that journey.
Gotcha.
And so it worked out great for me because we were setting up at races anyway to promote the social media app, get people to sign up and things like that, and I could race. And so I was like racing the pro races and then also come off the track and sling social media signs.
Yeah, for
you
sure.
know what I mean? And so that kind of like was my 2011, 2012. And then on the way back through on this journey of going to all these tracks, we traveled for about a year and a half, just track to track. Every 3 days we're at a different track.
Wow.
And so it was a grind in an RV, which was fine. I just drove a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And it made me never want an RV again. I actually, the damn thing broke so much. And guess who was the mechanic? You know what I mean? So I was the whole thing. Oh. And anyways, I just got a camper just recently, and it's like I'm still remember. I'm like, damn it. Why did I do this? Yes. Mainly it was to take the kid camping. Yeah. But anyways, we stopped at this track here in Texas. It was our last stop before going back to Florida, called Cycle Ranch.
Okay.
And we're there. We usually 2 to 3 days. We stayed there for 2 weeks because we love the track so much. It was just like an amazing track. The people
what made
were
it so
great.
Nice?
The dirt.
Really?
That's typically the determining factor with tracks. If you've got really good like sandy loam, the track develops really well. And it was like elevation and, stuff that you wouldn't typically see in Texas.
Nice.
And so we ended up staying there a while. And then the GM of the track the night before we left, the guy that hired me did pretty well. He had sold some form of marketing business when he was 27 for a lot of money. And so he had the money to do kind of whatever he wanted. And this was kind of like a passion project, this thing we were putting together with the social media. Anyways, the GM sits us down on the way out and says, hey, the track's about to go back to the bank. Would you guys have any interest in buying it? And I know Ian still owns it to this day, but I knew at that time that I'm like, no way is he going to want to buy a track. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I thought in my head. And I'm like, that's funny. He knows he's got a little money. He's trying to figure out how to save this track, which, rightfully so. And we leave. And I think Ian kind of blew it off like, I'll think about it, whatever.
Yeah.
And then like 4 or 5 months later, Ian calls me like, hey, you want to move to Texas? And I'm like, sure. For what? It was like, yes, then what for?
Of course, what do I do?
Yeah, well, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
He's like, I'm buying Cycle Ranch. And I'm like, oh, sweet. He's like, will you help me, run it and get it back, in shape? And so that was kind of what I did. And part of our, revenue plan was coaching because we were already kind of doing it.
Smart. And
so we started doing that whole thing, and he put a lot of money in the place and made it beautiful and did a really good job with it. And it started kind of catching wind again. And my buddy and I, this is a long story short, but my buddy and I basically went up in the tower of that place and we just started coming up with names for our coaching company. And there's even a backstory on how we met, but it was kind of funny. Anyways, Ian and I had a little bit of like tension, right?
Okay.
I'm going to Brazil for a race. I'm going to tell this story because it's worth telling, and it needs to be on the internet,
of course.
Because I think we've had a lot of people ask like, how did the MX factories start? And I don't know if we've ever even said it on the internet. So this is a first.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. So you guys make sure you clip that.
Oh,
Paul.
hell yeah.
Clip this one, Paul. And so we got a little bit of tension. Right. Anytime there gets money involved on top of what you were agreed upon, right? Like he paid me a little money every week, and it's like, okay, now we're bringing in some coaching money. I want you to do it this way, and maybe I had a different opinion, on like how I wanted to do it, or money, whatever. And so I go to Brazil for a race.
Nice.
And I have a camp immediately when I get back. Right. I have this 3-day camp planned, and when I come back, there's a new coach there.
Oh.
And I'm like, dang, who's the new coach?
Yeah.
And it was like, hey, this is Jason. And to this day, I think it was meant to, and I just want a disclaimer, Ian's evolved a lot, and I don't think that he would ever do this to anyone now, and it may have not even been this, but this was like a little bit of a flex, like, hey, you're not you're not the only one that's willing to do this job. And so
love it.
You know, we go into this camp, and I'm now coaching this camp that I promoted with some other guy.
Oh, God.
You know, I don't know him from Adam, other than he used to work here a long time ago. And what really backfired, is we became like the best of friends. Like
you and Jason?
Yeah. Yeah, we were homies, right? Like, oh, we're like
we see eye to eye.
Yeah, we get along. You know, we
thanks,
get this.
Ian.
Yeah, thanks, dude. And so that evolved in Jason and I started the MX Factory together and moved away from Cycle Ranch. And ironically, Jason ended up marrying Ian's girlfriend at the time. So it was like,
wow,
who was my friend, right? And it was just, they had broken up well after that. But it's just funny how, you know, like,
oh my God,
when you look at things in the moment and you don't give the opportunity for it to be just completely different than you think it's going to be, sometimes things can look really hairy.
Yeah.
But when you're like, it's going to work out. So anyways, we came up with the MX Factory in the tower at Cycle Ranch and did a little bit there and then ended up moving to Austin together and started our place over in Lakeway.
Nice. So you're up in the tower coming up with, what were some of the other names that you guys were throwing around?
Well, you know, there's this guy that was doing a pretty good job. He's an ex-pro, Sebastian Tortelli. He had the Champ Factory. And we thought it was like the coolest name.
Yeah.
But we wanted a name that was more brandable just to coaching, not just coaching.
Yeah.
Right? Like we want to be able to do other things with the brand. So we just came up with the MX Factory. We kind of piggybacked off of his idea there with the Champ Factory, and it stuck. And we're like, oh, that's the one. That's like super cool and it's super marketable.
Yeah.
And, you know.
Well, it also helps describe what you guys do.
Yeah.
You know, like motocross factory, not necessarily production, but teaching of sorts. So now that you have the MX Factory up and running, how long has it been up and running for?
So that was 2014 when we kind of really took the leap.
Wow.
Yeah. So we're sneaking up on 10 years.
I was just going to say, it's going to be here before you know it.
Yeah. 2012 is when we came up with a name, but it was kind of, you know, we're loosely doing things at that point. When we really kind of got committed was 2014.
Okay.
And that's when we moved into our place up here in Austin and basically building it out and doing all the stuff that you do when you're trying to start a business.
Yeah.
And Jason and I lived on the property and kind of just hit it head on. And we ended up doing our YouTube channel right about that time too.
Nice.
And so he ended up doing a lot more on the YouTube channel and a lot less on the everyday stuff. Which is a lot of work, you guys surely understand that.
Yeah.
And so the YouTube channel kind of just took off right away, and he became a big proponent in that.
Well, I think they're kind of like part and parcel almost. You know, you kind of almost have to have that, particularly if you're trying to grow a business. One of the things that I wanted to talk about was, let's talk about the program, the actual ride program.
Sure.
Like, was that something that was novel at the time? Was anybody else doing anything like that?
No, not especially in our Learn to Ride. So we have basically, I look at it in 3 different categories.
Okay.
We have our online programs, just online courses that anyone could buy and go out in their backyard, watch a video,
boom,
and do it, move on to the next step.
Yeah.
And then we have our in-person coaching, which is going to be private lessons and camps.
Nice.
I do a lot of travel camps and things like that. So like this weekend we go to Dubai for 10 days.
What?
Out there. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Nice.
So this will be our 3rd trip out there. The people out there are great. But and then we have our Learn to Ride program, which is here. And that's brand new people off the streets.
Yeah.
We supply the bike, the gear, everything.
Nice.
And so I love that program for what it is, because it's getting new people on bikes safely.
Yeah.
And that's a hard part. You know, it's a hard part.
Yeah, that's what, I mean, looking back at what, you know, I'm not saying that my mom and dad weren't wrong for that idea, but if there had been an environment where I could have done it safely, they might have been more willing to invest in that for me. So, you know, I am grateful that there is a program that not only brings the information to the kids, but brings it to them in a way that also can feed that kind of like passion of sorts and give them that kind of, that little, just kind of like a gentle nudge in the right direction. Now, let's talk a little bit. Describe the Learn to Ride program. What really goes on in the Learn to Ride program?
So, basically when you come in, it's like gear up process. We go a little debrief on bike, a little debrief or a little education on bike, education on what the first steps are going to be.
Yeah.
And then we'll go into the process really slow. We'll have the movements done on the bike stationary. We kind of wrap that out a little bit, and then we go to where we just waddle the bikes. Like we turn them on, like, let your feet touch the ground.
Gotcha.
So we can start working on clutch engagement. Really, that's the biggest piece. If they can figure out how to not let the clutch go real fast and take off, which engages that whiskey throttle thing that we talked about.
Always want to avoid that.
Yeah. So we're doing this. We're doing like never ridden before to like full on being able to ride a dirt bike in 90 minutes. So that's
crazy.
It's a pretty quick process.
That's amazing.
And it's, we have tons of success. We've probably, I haven't looked at the numbers, probably over 6,000 or 7,000 new riders.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people. That is a lot of people. So like so you basically, it's a turnkey operation. They just come to you and you walk them through this progression. Mm-hmm. And I like the reason why I'm enamored with this is because it's brilliant in the sense of it takes you from zero and walks you through, but it's a progression where there's the building block process that before you can get out there on the track and actually do any of this stuff, you have to do this first. Mm-hmm. And then before you can even do this stuff first, you've got to learn how to do this stuff first. And you walk them through a segmented process that allows them to not just, because what I also want is I want them to have fun. Yeah. If they're not having fun, there's, again, from your perspective, from the, when I put the business cap on, I got to think about that if the customer is not happy at the end of that session, they may not be coming back. So how do I make it so that they are happy and enjoy it and have fun? And you do it by just taking it one little step at a time, but making it in a structured format where there's also like, lesson A leads to lesson B, leads to lesson C, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I couldn't see how many actual blocks of instruction that you have, but there is a pretty comprehensive listing of everything that you do, basically from tooth to tail.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we're one of the first people that kind of put the process together like that. There's a lot of great coaches, and it's evolving, right? There's definitely people, getting, I'll call it louder in the space of coaching. They're out there in the world. Yeah. But we definitely really dive deep on the details.
When you, like, looking at it now, okay, so you've been coaching for a long time. You've got this well thought out and executed plan for your program here. What are some of the obstacles that you had to overcome to kind of bring that to fruition?
Well, learning how to run a business. I mean, I don't know if you guys got the education piece on the front end of this one, but no one was teaching me business school when I was 16, I can tell you that. Now what I will say is that, like, getting inside like the gym and getting into some of these jobs early helped a lot. Yeah, for sure. Because they trusted me enough to put me in positions where I was, taking care of some of the bills and understanding how to check people in and out and understanding how everything needed to kind of line up in the books and things like that. And so there was that piece of it. But I think the most challenging part is when it got bigger than me, right? When I had to hire employees. Oh, yeah. And understand how to be a leader in that way. And now this is where I think that being a little more involved in team-type activities would have been beneficial.
Yeah, true. There's a possibility, but I like how you approach that. When it became bigger than me, and I had to actually bring somebody on, and the word that you used was leader. You had at that point, because that's the hard part for a lot of people in the business setting is, you have to trust that who you're bringing on will fulfill the mission, the job that you have set forth for them. And if you do a good job of selecting somebody, then that gives you the opportunity to kind of focus on other things to help continue to move the business forward. Because that's the thing. The worst thing that can happen is that your business becomes stagnant. If you're not growing, the old adage, if you're not growing, you're dying, I believe has some validity in the business world, particularly younger businesses that are still trying to make it through the 3, 5, and 10-year marks. Like, those are the challenges that we all face. So you got a little OJT at a younger part of your life, and now you're kind of at that point where you've managed to create the success. I mean, it's successful. So what would you say has been probably the best, like what do you think you did that led to the success other than already have a good product? Like the business side was the weak area. What did you do to kind of make it successful?
Well, there's an old saying that goes like, if you want to win, there's 3 ways to do it. You're either the best first or you cheat. And we didn't cheat.
Okay. You were the first.
We were the first, which made us the best.
Yes.
We have a lot more competition now, which I like.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah.
You know, people get worked up for other people doing what you do, and I'm like, oh, wow, they did that really nice. Maybe I should do that.
I love hearing that.
You know what I mean?
It's so
and
true.
So I pay attention to our competitors, and I even work with them. Like, I've got probably
Good for
one
you,
of the
man.
biggest names in the sport coming to coach my camp with me this weekend.
Nice.
Before we head to Dubai. So I think that piece is like, well, we led the way, especially online.
Yeah.
You know, there's people
Breaking
coaching before
ground
us.
is so cool. I mean, when you can do that, there's a lot of props directed at you for that. For one, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to comment on that when you are the first to bring something to market, there's a lot of street cred that goes with that, and that kind of flows with you. And I'm sorry, I want to say one more thing. The fact that you also embrace your competitors and don't, like I've tried to encourage people, don't look at them as competitors. If they're doing a good job, they complement what you're doing. Yeah. And they bring more to what you're doing, because you see, like you said, hey, I like how they did that. That's not something, I don't have all the answers. I'm terrible at the business side. So a lot of times I do look to see what the competitors are doing, because I'm like, oh man, that's smart. I should have done that. And then you kind of figure out, okay, well, I can't do that, but I can do this.
Yeah, you put your twist on it.
Exactly.
That's the way the world goes around. I think people that get upset about that are going to get stuck at some point.
Oh, man.
You know what I mean? Because you can only do so much yourself. And, so I think that there was people online, I guess you would say. Like, there's a guy named Gary Simics that has been coaching. He's probably one of the oldest, most well-known coaches. I think he retired now. He's like late 70s or whatever. But he was like the first one putting like videos out and like tapes.
Okay.
You could buy his tape.
Wow.
And then DVDs. And so I think he pioneered the online world, or like the, do it yourself kind of world.
Huh.
But then we really kind of came in and put the twist on it, and really pushed on free education online.
Like it.
You know what I
like
mean?
it.
Free education.
Well, it's a brilliant plan, because if people come to you because you're putting out a good product, if people are interested in what you're having to say and they value that product, what they're going to do is, what else can I get from them? Oh, there's this paid program that I could do. There's this program that I can actually learn from. So it's brilliant marketing to actually provide information for people. I think putting things behind a paywall too early can be detrimental to your success, because then you have to rely on your customers being able to spread the word, when if you don't have a lot of customers, you don't have a lot of people spreading the word.
100%. Well, I think that is very well said. And we didn't sell anything until like a year and a half ago.
What?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
We just went hard on YouTube.
Yeah.
And ad revenue, and that's like, it was doing pretty good.
Yeah.
And we're like, well, keep people watching, keep it going. And we just built our first online course. And by say we don't sell anything, a lot of people came to us for personal coaching and or camps because they found us. And that's where we were like, oh, well, we don't necessarily have to sell them a product, because they're becoming our customers.
Exactly.
And those are high ticket sales, right? When they come to you in person.
Absolutely.
And so like, why would we sell them something for $12 when we could, they trust us enough that the information is correct, that they're going to come spend $1,000 or more.
Smart.
And we never really even marketed our stuff. They found us, sorry for that.
No worries.
They found us as far as like, where are you guys going to be? Hey, we're from Minnesota. We'll be down there in 2 weeks. You know what I mean?
So it's brilliant. And I love talking about this, because I was a horrible businessman, still am not a very good businessman. And a lot of the things that I've done through trial and error. And so I try to learn more from other people's trial and errors than my own. And one of the things that, we did early on was we tried to provide, in the form of blogs. Like I wrote a lot in my early years, and, published books and articles. And then we started the blog on our website. And, I just was putting out as much information as I possibly could. And the reason for that was the exact same reason that you stated, which is you build trust within the customer base. And while they may not purchase a book, they may not buy a book, later down the road, if they have the opportunity, they recognize when that opportunity is floating there, well, you know what? I can do this. I can go ahead and go to this weekend class that he's got that's maybe an hour and a half away from my house. And so that has been like one of the models that I've tried to follow. And it hasn't always produced the most, revenue stream, the biggest revenue stream, but it's produced the more satisfying revenue stream because the people that are coming to me have kind of gotten to know me through the blogs, through the online, what information I release in the public sphere. So I've been grateful for that. And it's, it was like, what can I do? That's honestly how I came up with it, is like, honestly, it was frustration because I got tired of answering the same questions over and over again.
Yeah.
So we started to just put them in blogs. And this was way before YouTube was as popular as it is now. So I just put everything in a blog. I tell students all the time, if you have a question before you ask me, you might want to research all these like 800 blogs that have been written on the subject.
Yeah.
And so maybe you'll find your answer there.
It is tough.
It is.
We get those emails all the time. How do I jump? Like, what do you mean, dude? There's 100 videos on this. You get a little defensive at first, but then you realize that people just want to make a connection with you. And that's also something that we should be grateful for, is like, they're just emailing you to hope that you email them back.
100%.
You know what I mean?
And you know what's so funny? I used to I would get I had this idea, and I got it from another person that I watched that ran his own business, and it was in the construction side, and he was a really busy guy, and I remember he said, I put all this information up on our website. I have all this information available for people. When somebody sends me an email, I just assume that they didn't put the time in to learn about what we offer. So then I'm not going to put the time in to respond to them. And I kind of had that attitude early on. And, but yeah, when I respond, like most of the time, emails that come to our general email address box will typically be answered by staff. But when I get an email, I do try to answer it as quickly as I can. And I try to put that personal touch on it because I feel like that's a great way to start connecting with other people. And while it's connecting one customer at a time, some of those connections that I've had from emails have turned into repeat customers, which is, from a business model, one of the best things that you can possibly do. So it sounds kind of silly, but taking the time to actually respond to the emails. And I apologize for all those people that haven't gotten emails back from me in a timely manner.
Me too.
But I do try. I do make the best effort that I can, balanced with all other things that are thrown at me in my life. So, okay, so let me ask you this question. I always enjoy hearing how people answer this question. How do you deal with failure? Well,
I think that I've failed enough to look at it as an opportunity. Still to this day.
Yeah.
Where you just screw up. And I think that you realize real quickly that we all do it. Some people are just a lot better at hiding it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And it is what it is. I think that's the underlying thing, is like, how I deal with it is like, you either learn from it or you die. One of the two. And I've had a pretty up and down year this year. My mom passed away. I moved my business, and it's been one of those years in court stuff, one of those years where it could really take someone down. Just how things kind of snowball.
Yeah. Where
you're like, dude, could it get any worse? And as soon as you ask that question, God's like, okay,
you want more?
You
Here
think
you
you're
go.
Tough, but it puts you in a state where it's like you either climb out and learn and get better, or you die. You literally, your soul can die.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there.
And where it's like, life was really, and then I also think of man, I've had a pretty not hard life. It was hard in the sense that I had to make it on my own.
Yeah.
But I was good at stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? In my opinion, if you're willing to work hard and you're good at stuff and you can really recognize what you're good at, and you're willing to double down on it, it's not that hard. You just got to do it.
Yeah.
And so we've just kind of gotten to the point where it's like big enough to where things get kind of beyond my grasp of thinking.
Yeah.
And that gets hard. And then this year, like I said, was definitely up and down. So it's put me in that question a lot, where I've been like, well, how am I going to get through it? What is the best way to get through it? Because I'm ultimately I'm teaching myself how to act, which in turn, this is what I always think about, which in turn is how I'm going to teach my kid how to act.
Love it.
You know what I mean? And so I've really tried, and we all fail, but I've really tried to just approach these things with grace and know that it's all going to be okay. And it's worked out nice, like I have good days more than I have bad days, and the bad days I know will go.
Yeah.
And will teach me something. And so I've learned a lot this year. I should say it that way. If you ask me how I deal with it, I'll just say I learned a lot.
I love hearing that. I mean, honestly, I think that's one of the best ways that you can deal with failure. I mean, a lot of times you hear all these various catchphrases and whatnot. You can't control things outside of, life and whatnot, but you can control how you react to them. Mm-hmm. You can manage that. And learning through these failures, I always try to, on the firing range, whenever we have a student that, fails a drill or misses a shot or something along those natures, we always try to emphasize that, that's a gift. You were just given a gift. It's how you choose to look at it is what's going to really help you to cope with it. Like sure, you failed this drill and as a result you failed the class, but what did you really, how did that failure occur? Why? The teaching point behind the failure is the gift. And if you can take that with you, if you can take that and value that, there's a lot, then, failure no longer has that negative connotation. I mean, there are plenty of failures that are bad, of course, but sometimes I feel like we also are reluctant to fail because, we have this notion that failure is always bad, and plenty of failure is bad. Don't get me wrong. Internet world, failure can be bad, but there's also plenty of opportunities for growth and failure. And if you're willing to take the time to kind of look at it and evaluate it, and, I make the same mistakes on somewhat frequent basis, but I try to minimize the frequency of those same mistakes. I think then you kind of walk away with a win in some cases. So I like hearing how you took it. And one of the other things that I really appreciated about your view on it is you handling it with grace. And that I think is severely underrated. On my part too.
Tough as a man.
Man, is it ever. I'm constantly learning that lesson, but it becomes a little bit easier. The more I put it on the forefront of my brain, the easier it is for me to try to be graceful about all of that and in a sense be humble about it. And once I can be humble about it, I can be a little bit more graceful about it. And that's kind of like the cycle that I work through.
Yeah, the ego. Once you let that go, right? And I tell people all the time, it's like I've literally my whole life been told to beat you or the next person or whatever, right? Like even the military, it's like, you're on this side, I'm on that side, and I don't really care who you are on that side. Yeah, exactly. And so that is something that like you can work for you or heavily work against you.
And what do you mean by against you?
Well, if you're breeding an ego all your life, and you never figure out how to manage it and use it for you, because I don't think the ego is bad if you use it for you.
Okay.
Right? If you use it in a way where in times it requires that human, the ego can come in and be like, no, I got this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And we can't pretend like those times don't happen.
That's brilliant.
And maybe that's even when your family's in a gas station, someone's in there with a gun.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
Right? At that time, we're not handling this with grace.
Yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean?
100%.
And let's be honest, those times are less than times where you need to handle things with less ego. But to like have a lifelong, especially as kids, where you don't really understand these things yet. Yeah. Where you're being taught to be this, animal at some points, right? It's like
many cases.
This person is not your friend. I can't tell you how many times I heard that where like the guy sitting there, he is not your friend.
Wow.
And it's like, well, I think he's kind of friendly.
He's kind of cool.
As kids, you're like, no, I like him. I like the way he wears his hat.
Yes.
Now these gear colors cool. Yeah. But it's like, once the gate drops, he's your enemy.
Yeah.
And then that taught me, it's like once the gate drops for those 5 laps, they're maybe not your friend. They want to beat you, you want to beat them, and they're willing to probably go to the extremes to do so, and so are you. But when the flag waves, then you got to know how to click that off and be like fist bump, like good job, dude. Like,
It's
that was
hard.
crazy.
Yes.
And the same thing happens in life is where it's like, there may be that situation where you have to let the inner beast come out. And the ego is going to drive him to fire up a little bit because the ego is going to say, no, you can do this. Remember when you did that?
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's a lot of times where it's like, no, you were wrong. You need to let your ego go.
Nice.
You know what I mean? You need to be like,
hard.
you were right. Like, it's so hard. Like, just the other day, my film guy, I'll tell this little story. He'll like hearing this.
Yes.
He was, we were kind of, because we just released a wheelie course, right? Like, it came out yesterday.
Nice.
And I had kind of recruited this influencer to promote it and things like this. And the whole time he was like, no, I don't think it's the right thing to do. They weren't in the build-up. It's not going to do anything, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, dude, why? What's the, if someone's got 100,000+ followers or whatever, what's the downside of having them shout out your stuff?
Yeah.
He's like, it just takes credibility away. And I'm like that we need that when we haven't told one person they were going to be involved the whole time. And it's like you market these things up and build them up pretty strategically. And I'm like, well, let's ask our guy that kind of, he's like our course, management guy.
Yeah.
He does this for a living and we hire him to help launch these things. And sure as shit, did he not be like, no, this isn't going to work because you guys, this, word for word, what Carson said.
Oh my God.
I just texted him and said, you were right, I was wrong. And then I was like, oh, because I kind of got worked up over it, I got worked up over it. I'm like, dude, why are you telling me no?
Nice. Good for you.
Just a simple, thing, but more serious things happen.
Absolutely.
That way.
Absolutely.
And I feel like if you can practice on the simple things where you're like, look, honey, I'm sorry. You were right. The seat was up. I thought it was down. I
see that happens in your household too.
Yeah, I thought it was down, but it wasn't.
My bad.
But yeah, I think the ego can work for you and against you.
I love that. So one thing that I wanted to talk about, but we got sidetracked on a couple of other things. It was all good stuff. Was mentors. While at such a young age, mentors in your life. Obviously, your grandfather, your father, but outside of that, what was like the best piece of advice that you were given by a mentor?
Ooh, I've had so many people that were like great people that helped me along the way.
Yeah.
Like when I was at the gym, Sean Jenkins owned the gym. Huge, like 370-pound black dude. He was a center for LSU.
Nice.
And then went on to coach high school football and do all that. Great guy. I think the underlying thing that I got from most of them and what I learned, not by necessarily their words, but by their actions, is they were just chipping away at something every day.
Oh, I love that.
And usually they were pretty kind, too.
Yeah.
From the people that I really was attracted to in a sense of like wanted to be around.
Yeah.
They had this nature that they were like, they had something inside of them that they were going after, but they weren't necessarily like knocking people down to get it. You know what I mean?
I love that. Yeah, yeah.
And most of them were like actually on the flip side, like building people up. Like Sean, for instance, with the gym, like he was in there like helping the kids get stronger.
Literally,
building
them up.
And so I think that if I had to like, because there's so many good people that came through my life, especially in my earlier years. It's less now. You spend less time because you're in less positions where you get out as much and put yourself in those positions where people can help you. I have a guy, his name is Alan Doc Cotton. He was a master drill sergeant and a medic and all that stuff. He's very still military. He owns a suspension company. And I think he's psychic.
Oh, really?
I think he is. And
that's a little good.
Dude, he predicts the wildest things. One just happened recently, and I'm gonna give you like I'm gonna change the story a little bit because it's from someone real personal in my life, and I don't want to put them out.
Okay, for sure.
So I go down. I'm having some struggles in life, right? And this is court oriented.
Okay.
Right, not getting sued or whatever, just court oriented stuff. And he asked me a few questions, whatever. And we had a court date set for this deal. And I was like, oh, man, it's just stressful. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of this, a lot of that. It's just whatever. It's not great. And Doc's like, you're not going to go to that one. And I'm like, what do you mean? And on my opponent in court had a significant date in their life that would be like an emotional thing. And he's like, you're not going to go to court on that date. And I'm like, he's like, it's probably going to get, he didn't say probably, he's like, it's going to get rescheduled twice and it's going to land on this date and you're going to win because they're not going to be able to hold their stuff together.
Huh.
And by God, if it didn't happen, it got rescheduled twice, not once. It's hard in this system, right? Like,
yeah.
rescheduled twice, and the exact day. It still gives me goosebumps to this day because I'm like, who are you? You know, I call them. I'm like, are you following? Like, there's no like he couldn't.
You read my trash or something?
Like, you know, who do you work for?
Oh my God.
And it's just a lot of times where he done stuff like that. Obviously, that whole thing went in my favor, so I was happy when I called him. But I was also like, I'm a little concerned. He talks real slow and calm, but he's also like a psycho on the inside, you know? Like, he just wants to rip someone's head off at some point.
I love it.
But yeah, he's been a great help. There's just so many. There's more names than I could name, but just like the underlying issue is like, hey, they're kind and they were chipping away at something, and that's really the two things that I really try to want to uphold. Is like, I don't want to be bad towards human people. I don't want to be bad towards anyone, but I want to serve people.
Yeah,
but I also want to win too.
I love hearing that, man. That's a brilliant strategy. I have a good friend. He was also a podcast guest here. He talks about, you know, moving the dirt. You know, daily you want to move the dirt. And some days you move it with a teaspoon. Some days you move it with a shovel. Some days you move it with a backhoe. Mm-hmm. But you always just want to move dirt. So I kind of, that kind of reminded me, your mentorship there. Well, let's start wrapping things up here with a final question. What is the biggest takeaway you want the listeners to have from this show? Well,
you know, I think that, let me put this in. Yeah. I think we come from two totally different worlds, but have the same, you know, we're on the train track side by side, but just different parts of the world where their tracks are. I think that the underlying thing, if anyone could take away, is that if you really enjoy something, there's opportunity for you to make a difference in people's lives. Will then in return help you. But it has to kind of go in that order. I think you have to find something that you really enjoy, and that gives you something that nothing else can give you.
Yeah.
And then you got to figure out a way to make other people's lives better because of you having that.
Yeah.
And then you win.
Yeah.
At the end.
Oh God, I love that. That's brilliant. And it's true. You know, like when I joined the Navy, I did not understand necessarily the service aspect of being in the service. It took me probably 2 deployments before. Actually, that's not true. It took me, well, technically my first deployment was 2 deployments. They were back to back. When we lost some team members, before it became more, before I recognized it was about service. My role was about service. And when I worked, and I, to this day, I still try to maintain that same philosophy when I'm trying to help others, even going out of my way to help others. You know, it in some way, shape, or form, it comes back. I don't know how, and I don't know when, but in general, it comes back. And even the times that it doesn't come back, it doesn't matter because it's worth it nonetheless for me, at a personal level.
Have you experienced? Am I allowed to ask questions?
Of course you can.
Have you experienced within your businesses a point where it gets a little harder to help without money in mind?
There is, yes, to answer your question. And that to me was a period I can almost tell you exactly when it was, because when we first kicked off our business back in like the early 2000s, there was the global war on terrorism going. And I would come home and I would unpack, put fresh clothes in my bag, and I would be out the door like that fast. My turnaround was so bad back then. And, you know, we were doing pretty well for ourselves. And it was about that point where I was at a crossroads. Okay, we're very successful. I can either choose to go down and continue to be uber successful, but it's costing me in other things like time away from family. You know, it was not easy being on the road all that time. I mean, I like being on the road, but I don't like being on the road that much.
Yeah. And,
you know, so I came to a crossroad where I didn't purposely choose to go down this road. It just kind of was the road that I chose. And it didn't become, I didn't realize why I chose it until much later.
Yeah.
You know, like this road was full, you know, this was like all the fun stuff, the cool stuff, the sex appeal, all of that was happening on this road. But for some reason, I chose this road. And I'm grateful for it. You know, it did help to reconnect with my family. It kind of happened much later because that was like about a 7-year stint of like just intense training and traveling. And it wasn't until after that, the kids are, 7, 8 years older, and they're in a different age group of sorts. So it was a little bit different to reconnect with them, but still it was worth it in the end for me.
Yeah, I agree. It's so hard to be away from your kids, too.
Oh, man.
I don't think people, if you don't experience it, it's very hard to understand.
It's true. It
Especially
really
as
is.
a man, because a lot of times you get, it's expected of you.
Yeah.
In some senses.
Of course. Absolutely.
Which is a really weird concept to me, but, we take it on for what it is. We do the best you can, but when you're away from them, it's like, look, there's a lot of hard things in life, but there's not many that's harder than that.
Yeah. I will, there were days on the road when I would miss events at the house. Birthdays were a big one.
Yeah.
My youngest son's birthday falls on a major trade show that I was almost expected to always be at. And it got so bad that when he was old enough, we would just go to that trade show as a family, and we would celebrate his birthday while I was there on that trip. And, through it all, he was a champ. He did it in stride. He may not have known the difference. Maybe he didn't have birthday parties like other kids did. We went and traveled on his birthday. But, man, dude, I regret some of those things just because you can't get those back. What I've learned in my business is the one commodity that is the most valuable commodity to me is time. I'll put time over cost or finances any day of the week just because I can't buy it. I can't get it. I can't reclaim it. It's gone. Never get it back. So that's taken me some time because I also was a guy that could never say no.
Yeah,
man, when I got a call and they were, it was from a big organization, prestige on the line. Absolutely. And I just, for the longest time, the hardest word in my vocabulary to use was no.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely guilty of doing this. As you build out a life that requires yeses too. You know what I mean? Like maybe you built a bit off a little bit more than you could chew in some scenarios. Yeah. And if you don't say yes, then what?
Yeah.
Are we gonna have to get a smaller house?
Exactly.
Right? Or we're gonna have to drive further to get the kids to school because we got to live outside of town.
Yes.
And so I think that if you find the root of it, it's typically you said, it's decision making, right? Like maybe we made a poor decision on I've done this where it's like, well, I've got to go do that because I really need to pay those bills.
So
I need
true.
Whatever. It's
it's there.
Sorry.
It's not unrealistic. It's not like anything that I did because I was selfish, because I wanted to be on the road. There was a part of me that we talked about the ego. It was good to be that, that in demand. That was definitely popular. I appreciated that. But at the end of the day too, I would have loved to have come back and the other thing that really kind of was hard, and I know that sometimes dads can do this, and I'm sure you can see this in the racetracks, well, maybe not, but when I would come back, I would try to cram it all in, just get it all done, and it'd be like a tidal wave coming at them, because I felt guilty that I wasn't there previously, and again, that's hindsight looking back. That was tough. That was hard on them. It was hard on me. If I did it again, I would probably try to make it more of an incremental thing and recognize that, the choices that I make, this is one of the consequences that I have to live with, is that I'm just not going to have as tight a connection as I was hoping for.
Yeah. How does it now?
It's better. Actually, they've also matured to their credit. They both have matured very well. Probably more from their mom than from me, but we have established a much different relationship now. Yeah. And I'm grateful.
Cool, man.
It is very cool. And they're young men.
Yeah.
And we have conversations that are different and very fulfilling. It's funny. I'm gonna bring this up. I'm sure he'll hate it. But last night we were sitting there and just I'm eating dinner and kind of finishing it up. And on the TV, I've just got a program playing. It's an older program called I'm sure you probably know it, the Pink Panther. Mm-hmm. And my older one, he's coming through and he's getting some dessert. He's eating some dessert. He's kind of he's standing behind me watching this, and he just starts laughing. He's like, "Oh my God, I can remember this from when I was a kid. This used to make me laugh all the time." And he's just sitting there laughing his ass off at this movie, and it was a great way for us to kind of connect to a time period that was long ago. Mm-hmm. And it's those little moments that I cherish big time. So, those are the things that you have to look forward to. The things that you do now will still come back in the future, and it'll still be an important part of their life.
I'm looking forward to that.
just always try.
But I get what you're saying about trying to cram it all in.
Yeah, that was.
I think when we realize that kids really only need love, and we just teach them to need the rest of the stuff, which is scary, right? Because you teach them like, let's go get a toy, let's go get this, let's go watch this movie, and it's like we're really just teaching them that they feel as if they need these things.
Yes,
but they just really need us.
100%. Probably the best piece of advice right there is they just need us.
Yeah,
unconditionally. Just us there, and that's like a great like piece of advice to any father of any age.
Yeah,
they just need us. Period.
100%.
All right, so where can folks learn more about you and the MX Factory?
TheMXFactory.com. We have our YouTube channel, which is just the MX Factory. If you want to find the MX Factory, just type in the MX Factory. You'll find
Beautiful.
it.
It's easy.
Yeah,
brilliant move on your part. That's another thing. That was smart business call.
Like, yeah, everything is the MX Factory.
Love it. All right. Well, folks, that's a wrap. I want to thank you, Tyler, for coming on the show, and this was a fantastic experience. I really, it was kind of very nostalgic for me because it was bringing back periods of my life from much younger that kind of I've not necessarily forgotten about, but haven't thought about in a while.
Yeah.
But I want to thank our audience for tuning in. I want to thank our sponsors for being a part of this. I want to thank the men and women for holding the line. You can check out all our previous podcasts by visiting thebulletproofworkshop.com. You can learn more about me and training opportunities by visiting tridentconcepts.com. Until then, I'm Jeff Gonzalez, and you're listening to the Bulletproof Workshop podcast. Stay safe or be dangerous.
See you guys.